Look at it. Look at her. Bonnie Jo Campbell. She's got a new book out. She's sitting in a public library. She's so dedicated to publicity that she was willing to do it. Bonnie, how are you doing?
Great, great. Yep, it's great to be at the Kenosha Public Library. It's a glamour. Kenosha's a great town, and they got a great library.
Are you on like a kind of still on book tour a little bit, or are you just going about your business?
Yeah, I am. It's kind of surprising when suddenly, you're living the dream and suddenly you're popular. It means you're not home very much.
So you've been popular before. This is not the first time you've been popular, but how long were you working on The Water? Okay, here it is. Here it is for the YouTube viewers, The Waters. Beautiful
Oh,
book. Beautiful book.
oh.
How long were you working on it?
Long time, long
Long
time.
time.
Yeah, this is true of all my books. Like,
Yeah.
that's the secret is that working on working mainly on this book was about 8 years. And however, when I look back at pieces of it, some of the pieces
Wow.
were even inspired before that.
Oh,
And this,
wow.
it's the same thing with my previous novels, is that when I look back, I was thinking, it was the seeds of it were in my
Oh,
mind for even longer.
you said you were working on this for 8 years, but it wasn't 8 years since your last book was released.
It was, yeah, it was
Oh,
2015, 2016, uh, that actually, late in 2015,
wow.
that
Okay, so it's
Mothers Tell Your Daughters was out. Yeah.
okay.
And, it's been a heck of a time. I don't know about you,
Yeah, no,
Bill,
that's
but
been an
it's
eventful few years that you were writing through. So
there's a lot of stuff going on, and
as a
you get older, people are getting sick, and people
yeah,
are dying, and you're trying to take care of them, and
yep,
and then you want to write your books too,
yeah.
and you hope you're getting smarter,
Are
as
you?
you're,
Do you feel like you are?
I think I might be smarter, or I might just be nervier,
Oh,
because
ah,
this book I kind of went out on a limb, and it's kind of a philosophical book a little
yeah,
bit.
for sure, for
It's
sure.
it's staking a claim about how the world is put together. And
I'm glad you did that, and I'm glad you said it because if I have one gripe with fiction writers, I love them as people, but it's wanting them to go ahead and put your flag down somewhere. It's okay. Like I know you have to show and don't tell, which is, artistically speaking, but I do think artists have to be willing to say what it is they actually think is true and what they actually, because at the end of the day, there's things you trust and things you don't, and things you've learned that you can't unlearn, and the things you won't do again. You don't, you're not 13 anymore, and you've probably made some decisions about things, and that's okay. What do you think?
yeah, I'm on board with you, because I actually think for those of us who love to read fiction,
Yeah.
that's why we're reading fiction.
Yeah.
It's all about making, as fiction writers, it's about making meaning out of these events.
Yes.
You can
Yes.
say, oh, we're just showing things, but no, we're making meaning. We're showing them in a way that we're making a claim that this matters. And this is why this matters. And the way we tell the story is making the case why this matters.
Absolute. Like you're making choices, and every time you make a choice, it's one thing, not the other, and you're making it for a reason. And you may not be able to articulate, and that's okay. Like you might feel it, know it intuitively. Sometimes you know things, and it's hard to it emotionally more than you can express it intellectually, or it might not work. But you still are aiming for something, and every time you make a choice, you are doing it for a reason. And I think it's dishonest to say I leave it entirely up to the audience. I mean, well, they're going to make their own decisions anyway. I mean, they're going to make their own decisions anyway, right? You like, there's nothing, but still, you have to have your own intention. Ah,
Yeah, I think so. Or you have to come to your own conclusions that are
yes.
probably slightly different than what you intended when you set
Oh,
out to write
for
the book.
sure. For sure, because you do have to. I always say that a story idea comes to me in service to me. In other words, I had a desire, but then I'm in service to it. the telling of it, I then am in service to it. Does that make sense? Like it shows me what I'm meant to learn from it.
Yeah, and when you take like eight and a half
Yeah,
years to write a book,
yeah,
you gotta listen to what's, what that
yeah,
thing on the page is telling. I mean, because this book changed so much. I mean, it was a much, I mean, at one point the book swelled to almost 700 pages. And
oh, wow,
yeah, well, the thing is, like you said about choices, this book is told in the omniscient point of view,
yeah,
which means I I can be anywhere as the narrator can be anywhere.
yeah,
And so, and the narrator can also be everywhere and telling, like it can be God's point of view. And
yeah,
so, at every point, even if I know what's going to happen, which that takes me a long time to even figure out what's going to happen in the book, but
right,
I have to know what point of view to be in. Do I want to be in one of the characters' point of view, or do I want to be outside the point of view, saying, here we are at this party, and this is what this party means.
yeah.
And so yeah, it's so many choices and just an agony of choices. I always feel like when I'm deep in a book, I can't decide what I want for dinner.
Oh,
Like I'm just burned out
as you
after
said, I've
that.
made enough choices today. Just,
Yeah, I'm just like, feed me, world, feed me. Just
it's
bring me
fun.
something.
It's funny. I was talking about this. I have this friend who's a writer, but he really he's so intuitive. He doesn't ever want to plan anything, and so he never knows what he's going to eat. And I'm like, no, Chris. It's Monday I'm having tacos. Wednesday I'm having pot. We had my wife and I have our meals laid out because we're both writers, and it's like I just want to know. I don't
Oh,
want to think
that's
about it
great.
at
Do
the
you
end.
actually do you actually plan it out in advance?
It's not planned. It's just every Monday we're having the same thing. Pretty much. There's a few days there's a little wiggle room, but no, there's almost no.
I love that.
It
I
works
think I
for
could.
us.
Well, you know how I eat. This is terrible. What I eat is every day I actually write at my writing shack. So I'm
Oh,
at the
oh, nice.
shack.
You and what's his name who did James and the Giant Peach and Roald
Oh yeah.
Dahl had a writing shack, right? So you
Yeah.
and
I got a shack. It's on the river. So
oh,
I got a
nice.
river shack. It
Okay.
was an old meth house, so it's perfect for a writer. It's got a lot of stories in it.
No.
The husband and I had to turn it from the meth shack into the writing shack.
Okay.
So so I get back to the house and I stand at the stove and I cook an onion. And then I look around and I say, what else is there? I chop up an onion and start frying it. And then I'm like,
Uh-huh.
what else is there? I should be like you. I should
Just
plan.
no, make the recipe, make the menu up ahead of time, but just like
I know. I
stick to
think
it.
you're right. I
Uh,
had a friend who used to he actually had a chalkboard in his kitchen, but he was trying to make something different every day. I
oh,
like your style
no,
of
I
like,
can't do
nope,
it.
this is Thursday. This is Thursday. It's pasta. Let's
You
go
see,
with the
this is
pasta.
how I've rolled for years. Thank my wife and I think alike, so it works with us in that way. So
Oh yeah.
I was really actually interested in the tone you opted for in this book because to me, the first thing I thought of, and I don't think you intended. Well, I don't know what you intended, but it had a quality of fairy tale or myth, somewhere between myth. It could, even though someone's a lawyer and there's doctor, like there's a lot of very moderny stuff. The tone felt like it was something like mythical almost to me. I don't know if you intended that, but that's how it read to me. That's how it felt to me.
Well, this is what happened over time. And I did not intend to write a fairy tale like story, a
Yeah.
mythy story.
Right.
But what happened is, and I feel like this was a whole education for me. What happened is that as I tried to be, I mean, I'm known as the gritty writer, right? My
Right.
reputation is like gritty details. That's what I'm
Right.
about.
Right.
Gritty
Right.
details. No, don't pretty anything up. I'm all about the noir, the country
Right.
noir,
Rural
whatever.
noir.
Rural
Rural
noir.
noir. Right. Who knew
Yeah,
was there
whatever
such a
that means.
thing?
I
Right.
know. So that's what I was all about. And I'm like,
Right.
I'm going to give every detail and I'm going to stare at nature also,
Okay.
which
Okay.
I'm going to stare at nature and I am going to study the swamp and I'm going to present to you the swamp as the reader gets the whole swamp. But what
Right.
happened, the more after a few years of writing this book and rewriting, what happened is something sort of magical started happening as a result of paying close attention to detail.
Yeah.
And this mythic thing started rising off the page, and I had no intention of it. And this has happened before. I could tell you how it happened before as well. But this happened before, and it started happening again. And what I'm realizing is that, okay, we think of fairy tales or myths in some way as being, oh, those are the basic stories. Those are the simple stories.
Right. Right.
Okay, but they're not exactly that. They're the most essential stories. And if we are being true to our material, totally true, and as honest as we can, like I really don't bullshit as a writer.
Right.
I can't even have an outline because that would restrict me.
That's it.
I
There you
have to
go.
be so true to the material.
Right. Right.
And what happens if you're really true to your material? The old stories start rising up through your material. You
Right.
get in touch with the old stories because the old stories are the ones that are always true.
Yeah.
That's what fairy tales are.
Well,
Fairy tales and myths, they're always true. And us writers, we can get to that.
yeah.
But it might take 8.5 years.
Well, it might, but I think one of the things I like about the concept of myths and fairy tales is they aren't rooted in a time. In other words, my wife's a writer, and she says, I don't ever want people to think a thing I'm writing is about this time. I always want it to feel like it's about every time, but it has to be placed somewhere in some place. But you want it to, I always think that ultimately you want to feel like it's out of time. Like, yes, these things physically are happening now, but what is being talked about could have been talked about anywhere and at any time, because it's something essential about being human, which is what the myth, the myth, certainly the hero's journey myth that Joseph Campbell found, that applies everywhere, every time, if you want it to, right? It's not just the Knights of the Round Table, obviously.
Yeah, because we want these stories to work, and I'm like you. I try to avoid letting people pin it down.
Right.
However, there is a weird thing that had to happen because there was so much nature in the book that I had to be so much nature, and also things were happening on certain days of the week. So I had to actually, at a certain point, I had to stop being completely abstract and I had to pin it down in a moment of time.
Yeah.
And I didn't like doing it, but I'm glad I did it.
Oh.
Because what that allows you to do, if you pin it down, it means if you're following your story carefully, then you can make sure, yes, this can be a full moon, because I had a full moon here. And so what I based all that stuff on, the full moons, the weather, everything is based on 1999 to 2000. So I was able to, so I had to consult all the time. Okay, if this is May, if this is the middle of May, then I got to make sure there was a full moon in the middle of May.
Oh my
because
God.
what I figure is it had to be true. It had to be possible at some point.
Okay.
You know what
So
I mean?
because even though nobody, except for the most annoying close reader is going to know, say, in fact, there was no full moon in May of 2020.
I know, but aren't you afraid of that annoying person?
Yes, I suppose so. I interviewed Margaret George, the historical novelist, and she's like my fans, oh my God, she says, you can't, if you get anything wrong, they will let you know.
I'm telling you, yeah, they're brutal. I have to assume, as much as I love my readers, I have to assume that they are hostile. I have to assume that if I have a typo, they're just gonna leap with joy.
Right, they got you.
They're gonna with glee, and I have to assume, like, if I get the full moon wrong, they're just gonna be like, "She's an idiot." So I worked really hard to get like all these ridiculous. I had to, at the very last minute in the book. There's a crow at the end of the book, and the crows are really important in the book because they're kind of always above looking down, and they have opinion. They actually have opinions in the book. So, but at the end of the book, I had this crow on a nest looking down. And then I just thought for a minute, and I had to go look that up. And I'll be damned. In June, the crows in Michigan are not on their nests. So I had to actually go change that.
All right. So you want to get the details right. I appreciate it. But on some level, don't you think what's happening there? I mean, yeah, you fear that your readers are going to be, but there's a sense of like, I want it to be true. And maybe that is your psychological need to say, no, I really want true. So if they couldn't do it, they couldn't do it. And so there's factual truth, there's emotional truth, but you just want a whole sense of truth. Do you think that's going on?
I want it to be possible at least.
Yeah.
And so for example, watching the full moons, that just makes sure I don't accidentally put 2 full moons like 2 weeks apart, you know?
Oh, right. Well, yeah.
Whereas like, ooh, this scene calls out for a full moon. It's like, too bad, Bonnie. You can't.
Well, it's sort of like in film, there's the continuity. There's a person whose whole job was you had one of your movies, one of your books was made into a film. Congratulations. And there's a whole person whose job is to make sure they're wearing the right sweater and their tie is done right. And that it's the same thing throughout. And if they didn't, the film nerds will catch it and they will tell them.
Because they can just back up the film and
that's
look.
right. You just freeze frame.
The book, they would have to actually read back, and most readers are not going to go back and read, but they might. So
all right, so it's been 8 years. My question to you is the difference between what we're doing. I mean, you have your own podcast. Congrats. Hope you're having fun with that.
My podcast is just where I basically talk to the plumber and to the guy at the cafe.
All right. Well, if they want to talk to you, that's fine. But my point is, you spent 8 years in the bubble, in your creative cocoon, and then you come out. Then you come out and you talk to people like me and readers. Is it a little disorienting, or have you done it often enough that you're used to the difference between the seclusion of writing and the public facing self who then talks about this book?
It's a great question, because I got to tell you, when I started talking to people, like, the book came out January 9th. And so I started talking to people maybe around a little bit before Christmas or middle of December.
Right.
I was mortified. I was terrified.
Why?
Because I just didn't have, first of all, I didn't have the confidence because the book hadn't come out. And I got a couple early reviews that I think the Kirkus review was kind of nasty. It was kind of nasty.
Oh,
and and those couple of early ones were like, that one was. And so, but also I just wasn't confident. I just wasn't confident, and I didn't know, and like, I didn't know if people would like the book. And also, I think it was what you're saying. It's that transition from I'm alone in my room, and I'm not alone. I'm talking to my husband. I'm looking at, Christmas Day, I was in the river pulling stuff out of the river. I'm doing I'm with my dog.
Yeah, but you're alone with the work. You're alone with your.
Yes,
you're in a world no one else can enter.
Yeah, nobody else was in my business with the work. Yeah. I was in my business with the donkey barn. The donkeys, they don't care. They don't care. They don't care about my work. Right. So like, suddenly people like asking up close and personal questions about my characters. Like, in a weird way, I was almost a little bit like, well, just read the book. Why are you asking me these questions? Right. Why are you getting in here? And then also, like, kind of acting like, well, I don't know about it.
Well, don't you have to learn? I mean, my last books were nonfiction, kind of personal growth type books, and so I have a very particular way I have to talk about them.
Yeah, but, and you have to get your ducks in a row.
My spiel down and all that, which I forgot until I started again. I'm like, oh right, I gotta organize this, but the kind of conversation I have is a little different. It's a little more, I don't know where it's going. I don't tend to focus as hard on the book, but sometimes people do ask you, like they're really coming to talk about the book, and I would think you got to learn like how you talk about it, because writing it's one thing, and then like I've done like your work's done with it to some degree. You probably don't want to talk. Maybe you don't want to talk about it. Like I already want to
Well,
get to the
it's a
next book.
hard question. Like when somebody's like, "What's the book about?"
Oh
That's the
God.
one that gets me. And I was like, I wrote a whole blog about it, like my
Yeah.
elevator pitch. And it
Yeah.
was like actually about 8 different ways at it. And
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
I actually had to read, before I had a good elevator pitch, I had to read like 10 good reviews of my book by other
Right.
people
Right.
because my way into the book is so different. I mean, my way into the book is how my characters feel. Like I write fiction by, I guess it would be method acting,
Yeah.
like
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
get in, I get inside my characters and I see how they feel. And
Yeah.
that's not a way of talking about the
No.
book from the outside. And also, like when you talk about when you have your elevator pitch, you're removing all subtlety,
I
you
know.
know, you know,
It,
and you're almost making you know what it is? You have to become a marketer.
yes.
You have to have marketing language about your
Yeah.
own work. And I can eventually get around to doing that, and I can do it for other people, but it's really hard to do it for
It's much
myself.
harder to do it for yourself. I mean, I spend time with writers at writers conferences, and I teach about writing and dealing with the
I
some.
need to come to a conference and talk to you.
Well, I deal with the psychological challenges of being a writer, particularly around marketing. And I was teaching one on pitching. Pitching. I don't know if you ever pitched, but they had
Oh,
to. But this is a big conference, and it occurred to me while I was teaching the pitching thing that if you've written a novel, you have read a novel. You've read a lot of novels, and then you sit down to write one. If you write poetry, you've read a bunch of poems, and then you write a poem. But if you have to write a query letter, you have never read one in your life. But if you're having to write a pitch, I can guarantee you've never read one. So it's almost like you're having to write in a form that you are totally unfamiliar with, and
yes.
you are the worst one to write it. You are the worst. You can talk passionately about your book, but you have no idea how to describe it. It's so typical of a writer.
It is. You are right. And so, do you advise people to
I
actually
do.
read
I teach them
pitches?
how to break it down. Like, what does your protagonist want? Why can't they have it? I actually,
Yeah.
what's his name? Sorkin, Aaron Sorkin, who I think is a brilliant at writing true stories. I just think he takes very big, challenging stories, breaks them down. And he was doing a master class my wife was listening to, where he said, "Look, at core, it's always what does your character want and why can't they get it? Like, there's so much of story is that at core." And if you can, and for pitching it, that's a great question. Now, you didn't work that way. You just thought characters, feelings, what's going on. And then eventually that probably rose up, but it didn't start there. That's all over this book. And that's
Yeah, yeah,
okay.
and
That's okay. It's
it's
much more
kind of a
organic.
different, it's a different kind of book too. It's
Yeah.
not the hero's journey.
No,
This
no.
book is not. It's a much more feminine book than that.
You don't think the hero's journey applies as much to women as it does to men? Really?
It did to me when I was younger. It did to me when
Interesting.
I was younger.
Maybe it's just a young
And
person's journey more than anything else.
I think it's more of a young person's journey. And I think both men and women, as they get older, I think the
Story
journey is a
changes.
little,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
story changes. I think it's more about community.
Uh-huh.
It's more about, well, and also the way that plots work, I think for us
You
is a
know,
little more spirally.
I
Like,
think you're right. I think you're right. Because I think one of the things that happen to us all as we get older is I mean, whether it's community or serving or teaching or help, like the impulse to go and give back just grows and grows and grows us. But when we're young, it's just like, can I do this? How do you do
yeah,
this?
and it's like, I will do this, I will achieve.
Yeah,
What do I
right,
want?
right.
So yeah, I think it becomes a different, and I think that was part of why I had trouble with this book. You'd not believe the drawings I made of this book, trying to like find like I was trying to like draw in the past I've always been able to draw
Yeah,
diagrams of my books, and when I have trouble, I'll turn to kind of tools. And this book would not behave. It just wouldn't
yeah.
behave, and it wouldn't shape itself into that kind of plot.
Oh
And
God.
so,
Just
and
listening to you, I'm having like acid flashbacks to I'd be lost. It's
of
like
whatever you're writing right now,
yeah,
probably.
it just that feeling of like, what is this thing? How do we do it? How do we get it to work? Oh, but you found it. You found it.
Yeah, but it was, I had you're going to laugh. I actually went back while writing this. I mean, I banged my head against the wall. I'd go out and take care of somebody who's dying, like my mother, and then I would
Right.
come back and try to write, and it was even worse. Like
Uh,
it wouldn't. There was no straight line of plot. There was no three acts form,
right. Right.
and I just kind of grabbed. Oh, and I went and I read everybody's book about how to write. I did. I
You
went back and
did.
read Ben Percy. I mean, I've written 5 books. I went back and read everybody's
Did
book
it
about how to
help?
write. No, not at all. I would write the book, I would try to draw the new diagrams, and it was a waste of time. And so
Oh,
what I needed to do is like search the old soul,
yeah.
search the old soul and figure out, okay, I'm a little bit of an old soul now. I'm 60, 61, and you know, I had to figure out like what matters to me, what matters desperately to me.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so these and it took me again back to the characters. And that's where, for fiction writers, or for literary fiction writers, it's just got to be about when in doubt, return to the characters. If you love them and care desperately about them, they're the ones who are going to guide you
Yeah.
forward,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, even it was actually um, Ray Bradbury of all people who said, "I don't have plots." He said, "A plot is just the footprints. I think some of the footprints my characters leave in the snow as they chase their passions." I think was his description of the story. Yeah,
Ooh, that's
but
nice.
yeah, he was an unusual character in the
He
pantheon.
really, he would really, I mean, what a soul.
I
What a
know
soulful guy, that
he
Ray
was.
Bradbury.
He was an
Yeah.
original guy, but he really believed just in the character, and I think that's one of the that it's sort of until you've done it to understand how characters have their own mind, that they're their own, that you're listening to them and following them. It's a hard thing to understand if you haven't done it because, well, you're the author, you're in the room. How could you be listening? But that's really what's happening, mystical though it sounds.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. I mean, every work of fiction that is completed is a miracle. I tell this to my students. Everybody who writes to me asking for a blurb,
Right. Oh,
I got to tell them, I may not be able to blurb your book, but I appreciate that it is a
right.
miracle that you
Yeah.
finished it, that you made meaning. You made meaning out of thin air. You
Right.
made meaning out of words. And what a miracle. And yeah, Ray Bradbury, I mean, such an exception. There's a book of stories written. I have a story I wrote for him in a
Oh,
book. I can't remember now this minute what the name of it is, but apparently he was dying when they were putting together this book, and that somebody actually read my story aloud to
really?
him. Yeah, and it was
I
such an honor. And he said something nice like, "Oh, she sure can write," or something, But I mean, he was on his deathbed.
Right, right.
But
Well,
what a
that is,
guy! But he really served his characters, and that's why, in some ways, he's a little bit different. Most science fiction writers are really writing ideas,
yeah,
and
yeah,
he really was celebrating character. I mean, as well as ideas, he
yeah.
was celebrating
But I sensed I was drawn to. I wasn't that. I was really into fantasy fiction when I was a kid, and then and Ray Bradbury. I couldn't really do science fiction, but I loved
Oh,
Ray
yeah.
Bradbury because he just there was something a different giddy up to what he was doing that I really loved. Well, I could talk to you for a long time, Bonnie. I have a music lesson I gotta go to, so I gotta end this. But I'm not quite done with you, you lovely person. I'm not quite done with you. Again, hits the waters, people. It's such an unusual book, beautiful book. Oh, get it. Go get it. Buy it. Read it. Enjoy it. But as I said, I'm not done with you. I got one more question. And what I want you to do is finish this sentence. If writing, all the writing you've done over your long life has taught you anything, it's taught you what?
Oh, it's taught me how rich this all is.
Uh,
I mean, the richness of what we're given in this short life. I mean, it's short.
I know.
It's short. And here, I'm 61.
I know.
I got a quarter of it left. And it's so rich. And it would be so easy to waste it. But my characters and my characters and even the struggle to write has just taught me about, it just teaches me what a gift this is. And so not to waste a minute of it if possible.